need to start off by talking about our choice to use the word fat in all of these presentations and these workshops instead of using the word obese. So when I first started to do my research around fat sex, fat studies, and trying to understand what the relationship was around sexual health, if anything, I started part of my career working at a bariatric clinic. And at the bariatric clinic, that was from a very medicalized model about trying to get people to lose weight. And so I was in that world where fat was studied as a concept of obesity, or the construct of obesity was what was used to classify individuals according to body mass index. And that is all under the assumption that obesity might be a public health epidemic. And so the research questions that come from this line of research hypothesize that obesity is a risk factor for things like sexual dysfunction, unhealthy sexual behaviors, or many other negative possible consequences. Now, the problem is that the findings from these studies, when they're studied in this way about obesity, or that there's an absolute necessity to lose weight, is that there is a lot of inconsistencies in what the research findings actually suggest. And one of the most interesting differences that I saw was depending on the culture. So depending on the society or the sample, the population from which these studies were drawing from, there were very different results, very different linkages, some positive, some negative around fat or obesity and sexual health concerns. But what seems to be the key variable is the sociocultural variable. And that seems to produce very different results. And thus, that's where we're going to be going in terms of understanding fat, through the sociocultural lens, which is so important because the study of fat and obesity has typically been seen through this lens of it's a public health epidemic. It's something that we all have to rush out and try and make sure that everybody's losing weight. And that also actually seems to promote things like stigma, discrimination, shame that seem to not be helpful in any way, except to continue to promote the diet industry's capitalistic enterprises. So when I read through all of that literature and that research and really found that it was not a helpful way to view our clients and what they were actually going through, it really had no idea what their experiences actually were and what actually mattered for them in their sexual health. So fat studies is the alternative way of really studying this area and not looking at it through a lens of obesity, but looking through it by saying that this is fat, this is not about an obesity epidemic, and we do not have to diet, we do not have to lose weight as the primary intervention or possibly any intervention at all. So fat studies assumes that the moral panic about weight in our society and labeling it as an epidemic is an attempt by the majority culture to enforce a conformity to thinness. The fundamental difference between these two ways of researching and discoursing about fat or obesity is the attitude towards the cultural notion of obesity being a crisis in healthcare that necessitates a public outcry for weight loss, and weight loss no matter how you get there. Shame or punishment doesn't seem to matter. We choose to take the attitude that is supported by the research and human rights, that fat itself is not a dirty word to be left in the shadows, that shaming people into losing weight is not a public health policy that can be tolerated, especially when we understand that it's fundamentally about a rejection of diversity and human variance, which is an outgrowth of colonialism, patriarchy, racism, and misogyny.